about this guy, our former colleague? He's a presidential historian, great political mind. He joins us on Wednesdays. How about it for John Rothmann? John, you heard the comments and the speech that Obama was delivering on the stump in Michigan. I wonder if you could speak to sort of these surrogates, first of all. Harris has and Trump has these very strong surrogates. I'd say among the strongest would be Barack Obama.
People don't vote for surrogates. Surrogates can make a statement, endorsements, all that sort of thing. But in the end, when people walk into the voting booth, I don't think surrogates matter.
And so, John, if that's true, it reminds me of something else, which is people vote with their gut. You know, people. That's what George Bush, the younger George Bush, sort of slid into power on. Was I want to? He's the kind of guy I would have at a barbecue. I could have a beer with this George Bush guy. Gore just seems too stiff to me, or whatever. These sort of the je ne sais quoi of the whole thing. How much does that? I feel like that factors in a lot, and there's not a whole lot you can do about that.
No, you can't. And remember, Gore won the popular vote by 500,000 votes, but we don't elect a president by the electoral vote. So why is Obama in Michigan? Because Michigan is central. If Trump carries Michigan, the odds of his winning the election go up. So the Democrats are concentrating. I had a note this morning, fundraising note, of course, from Elise Slotkin, who's the Democratic candidate for the U.S. Senate in Michigan, and they're desperate to make sure that Trump loses Michigan. Now, you asked earlier about the question of voting for Jill Stein. Let me just remind you, the man who wanted to ban Muslims from immigrating to America, the man who clearly is no friend of the Muslim world, is Donald Trump. I know that there is anger and distress over what's happening in Gaza, but why cut off your nose to spite your face? That me is the bottom line. And by the way, Trump would be doing exactly what Biden is doing. He would be resupplying the Israelis with the weapons they need to defend themselves. He's made that perfectly clear. So I think it's really a very interesting dynamic. By the way, now there's an appeal for Jews to turn out and vote in larger numbers. And I believe that Jews will, in the end, vote over 70% for Kamala Harris.
Why do you think? Is there or was there rumblings that that coalition was sort of divided and that Harris would not really get the Jewish
That is
vote?
exactly what Donald Trump was trying to promote. They have an ad running now from the Republican Jewish coalition. I wouldn't vote for Kamala, is their comment. It's nuts.
Yeah. Well, they did a couple of things. I mentioned this a couple of days ago. Bless you, sir.
Excuse me, there's nothing to sneeze at.
Yeah, there you go. That's Sir John Rothman. But I did see a couple of ads. We ran them here that were targeted, I think just yesterday we were talking about it, targeted to the Arab community in Michigan. And what they did was something deviously clever. They run the ad. It's a 30-second ad that celebrates the support of Israel on the part of Kamala Harris and mentions that her husband is Jewish and like a proud Jewish person who supports Israel. So this whole thing was done and wrapped in the sort of celebration of them as big supporters of Israel, knowing, and this is, again, it was targeted to the Arab community and Arab populations in Michigan. The idea being the more you reinforce how strong they are as allies of Israel, the more you ensure that that Arab community will vote against Kamala Harris.
No, you're absolutely right. It's insidious. And I will tell you that Jew hatred is on the rise. We've talked about it before. No question about it. I don't call it anti-Semitism. It's Jew hatred. And that is exactly what's being promulgated in all of this. And we need to resist it. I must tell you that I'm very worried about Michigan because carrying that state would ensure either Harris's victory or Trump's victory, if you believe the current lineup in terms of votes. And I underline and emphasize that. So 2 weeks from today, Mark, you and I will be analyzing the Electoral College and how that works.
It's pointed out in the chat, John, that a lot of Americans do vote against their own interests. It's an odd thing. You know, that's what I was talking about when I say the gut or we're attracted or sparked to a leader. because of charisma, because of family. There's so many things that go into this vote, and even as crucial as it is, I feel it goes off on some things that are kind of arbitrary.
Of course it is. In the end, we all vote based on our gut. And you have to understand the people who are committed to Donald Trump are deeply committed. And the people who oppose Donald Trump are going to do everything they can to see he loses. And the same thing applies to Kamala Harris. If you listen to Fox, as I do, you will understand very clearly that they want to make sure that Kamala Harris is not president. They're willing to excuse. They had Kash Patel this morning on Fox explaining away Donald Trump's absolutely nonsensical comments about Hitler. I mean, there is a sense of denial that goes on. But I happen to believe the American people have very good sense. And so I'm hoping, and I say this because I am very partisan on this matter, I'm hoping that Kamala Harris wins the election. She has to, for the sake of American democracy.
Because Brother Rothmann mentioned this, I wonder, Albert, if you could get the actual recording, which is what was part of the Kelly remarks, that, now when this has always been the case, but when you sit down with the interview subject, you not only jot down as a reporter what the person is saying, but you also record it. This has always been the way it is. But now, increasingly, with new media and the way in which we take in media, those audio recordings are critical. You really want to hear what the person's saying.
And Kelly was very clear. And may I add, not only was Kelly clear, but General Milley was clear, although we don't have a recording of that particular discussion, of what were termed fascist tendencies on the part of Donald Trump. Authoritarian.
So in that spirit, Albert, could you run a little bit? This is John Kelly talking about what, and again, I'll just remind everybody, John Kelly was closer to Trump than anyone in the last administration. He is the
longest-serving chief of staff.
Yes, and as chief of staff, he was trying to support the president in every way he could. The president at that time, of course, Donald Trump. And this is a guy who is a straight shooter. Just his background, one has to have respect for. He lost his son in Afghanistan, okay? Now, this guy is true blue, and one takes, I think, his statements quite seriously in a way that one may not with some others who serve with Trump. Here, go ahead. This is John Kelly.
You commented more than once that, that Hitler did some good things too. And of course, if you know history, again, I think he's lacking in that. But if you know what Hitler was all about, it'd be pretty hard to make an argument that he did anything good.
So what would you say when he said to you that Hitler did a lot of good things?
Well, I tell him that. I said, sir, if you first of all, you should never say that. But if you knew what Hitler was all about from the beginning to the end, everything he did was in support of his racist, fascist life, philosophy, so that nothing he did you could argue was good. It was certainly not done for the right reason. And but he would occasionally say that.
What would he say when you would lay that out to him?
He'd just, that'd be the end of the conversation usually.
So, John, it's stated quite starkly there by a loyalist. John Kelly was a loyalist, loyal to Trump. Started as a Homeland Security head, and then he moved into the chief of staff role. So as that chief of staff, he was loyal to Trump. When he makes these stark comments, I think it's sobering.
It's not only him, it's General Milley. It's people like Mark Esper, the former Secretary of Defense. It's Mike Pence, the former Vice President of the United States of America. It's many of the people who Donald Trump surrounded himself with who are now saying, keep this guy out of the White House. I must tell you that the minute I heard General Kelly's recordings of what he said about Trump, it should scare the living bejeebers out of everyone. You know what shocked me? Not that Trump said it, but Republicans trying to excuse it. Well, that's just campaign rhetoric, or, well, he didn't really mean it, and then we have these kinds of comments where he didn't really mean it, and then Donald Trump, what does he do? He comes out and he says, of course I meant it. The enemy within. Well, let me tell you, I understand when you talk about poisoning the blood of America. That's what Hitler said in Germany. when you talk about the enemy within. That's what Hitler said in Germany. Now, I'm not comparing Donald Trump to Hitler, but I am saying that if his former chief of staff and the former chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff accuse Donald Trump of fascist tendencies, look, if it quacks like a duck, waddles like a duck, and looks like a duck, it's a duck, and Donald Trump is a duck.
Milley, who served as a chairman of the Joint Chiefs, of course, is what John is talking about. He was quoted in Bob Woodward's new book saying that Trump is a, quote, total fascist and the most dangerous person to this country.
And what Trump, does that say? People who are voting for Donald Trump, particularly Republicans, need to understand the implications of a Trump presidency. We, in the next 2 weeks, are going to make a fateful decision about the path on which this country will proceed. Now, let me tell you something, Mark. On the radio, I always try to be fair and objective. I try to present both sides. The Trump people always called me. They enjoyed me, even though they knew I disagreed with them. This is no joke. This is the future of the United States of America. And may I say, there's a wonderful book published by the University of California Press called Chiefs of Staff. It interviews chiefs of staff up to 1986. And when you read the role of a chief of staff, and then you realize what General Kelly is saying, the longest serving chief of staff for Donald Trump, it should be a sobering moment. And the fact that members of the Republican Party are willing to take Donald Trump and what he's saying and swallow it, knowing the danger that it represents, is what is really disturbing. I hope that Donald Trump goes down to a crashing defeat, and the Republican Party will then have to deal with the fact that they excused him. But anyway, I want also, and we talked earlier, Kamala Harris made a statement today from her office in Washington, from her home, and I think it's very important that people hear it, because I'm going to be listening if we have time.
Albert, you have that, right? Kamala Harris's remarks. Brother Rothmann wants to opine on them and weigh in on them, as he should, but I would love for people to hear the remarks before, and we're not going to play all of them, but I'd love to play a little bit of Kamala Harris responding today to some of what's just gone down in the last day.
We have breaking news. Vice President Harris is speaking at the residence before she participates as a CNN town hall tonight in Chester Township. Let's listen.
He said he wanted generals like Adolf Hitler had. Donald Trump said that because he does not want a military that is loyal to the United States Constitution. He wants a military that is loyal to him. He wants a military who will be loyal to him personally, one that will obey his orders even when he tells them to break the law or abandon their oath to the Constitution of the United States. In just the past week, Donald Trump has repeatedly called his fellow Americans the enemy from within, and even said that he would use the United States military to go after American citizens. And let's be clear about who he considers to be the enemy from within. Anyone who refuses to bend a knee or dares to criticize him would qualify in his mind as the enemy within, like judges, like journalists, like nonpartisan election officials. It is deeply troubling and incredibly dangerous that Donald Trump would invoke Adolf Hitler, the man who is responsible for the deaths of 6 million Jews and hundreds of thousands of Americans. All of this is further evidence for the American people of who Donald Trump really is. This is a window into who Donald Trump really is, from the people who know him best, from the people who worked with him side by side in the Oval Office and in the Situation Room. And it is clear from John Kelly's words that Donald Trump is someone who, I quote, certainly falls into the general definition of fascists, who in fact vowed to be a dictator on day one and vowed to use the military as his personal militia to carry out his personal and political vendettas. Donald Trump is increasingly unhinged and unstable. And in a second term, people like John Kelly would not be there to be the guardrails against his propensities and his actions. Those who once tried to stop him from pursuing his worst impulses would no longer be there and no longer be there to rein him in. So the bottom line is this. We know what Donald Trump wants. He wants unchecked power. The question in 13 days will be, what do the American people want? Thank you.
And that's absolutely correct, Mark. 13 days. But I must tell you, never in my political life, working for Richard Nixon, having been involved in politics on every level, never have I been as angry, fearful, upset as I am today. When you have a former president of the United States quoting Adolf Hitler and saying he wants to have, well, I mean, it is unbelievable. So that's why I asked you to play that. And I'm going to tell you tonight, I will be listening to what Kamala Harris has to say in the town hall with CNN. More important, where the heck are the Republicans, for God's sake? They ought to be hanging their heads in shame.
I want to ask you about something I saw in the chat, and I don't think you're going to be able to really necessarily shed some light on it, but I never know, so I'll throw it out there. It seems as though there's an obsession almost with Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania is the swing state with the juiciest electoral count, et cetera. Do you have a sense of a trend in Pennsylvania, is the question I keep seeing in the chat for you?
It's not just Pennsylvania. It's Michigan, which is also critical. It's Wisconsin, which is also critical. I would say on election night, if we were on the air together as we have been in the past, that's where I'd be looking at these swing states. Do I have a sense? Look, I believe in the American people. I believe the American people fundamentally have good judgment. I believe when the American people hear these kinds of things, they will respond accordingly. Now, the fact is that about 20 million Americans have already gone to the polls and voted. You can't take your vote back. You can't redo it. By the way, I have a rule. I don't vote until the day of, because I never know what trends are going to be. I always remember when John Edwards was running for president and the scandal broke, and by the time we went to the polls, he was already out of the race, but so many people had voted absentee. This is a time when, frankly, I am looking for Republicans, Republican leadership, to stand up and speak out, because only the Republicans themselves can cure this evil. And it is an evil. I want to be crystal clear. I'm not an overly emotional person. I am very logical when it comes to my politics. May I give you one other thing? Do you know that Donald Trump said if he is elected president, he's going to invoke the Alien and Sedition Act of 1789? Google it, for heaven's sake.
Well, you can tell everybody what does that act used to do?
It would give him the right to expel people from this country unilaterally. And
so
by the way, that's the way in which
you go ahead. I'm sorry.
That's the only part of the Alien and Sedition Act which still stands. And may I remind you, when Franklin Roosevelt authorized the roundup of the Japanese in 1941, he did it using the Alien and Sedition Act. Can you imagine Donald Trump admitting he would use that power? It is absolutely unacceptable. And why this isn't a major national issue is, to me, well, maybe tonight Kamala Harris will, in the process of her interview on CNN with Anderson Cooper, really raise these issues. They ought to be, aggressively.
So it is those three swing states. Those are critical, as you say. And I don't think you can tell too much. You can look at trends and see that Trump is trending up. You can look at other trends from other aggregators of polls and see that Harris is trending up. I think it's all within the margin of error from what everyone's been able to see, as you know. So it's very, very hard to say. And even I would say that early voting, which was generally historically associated with a Democratic surge in voting, that now, I mean, Georgia had a record first day of voting, as you're aware. That isn't necessarily the case anymore. I was reading a piece yesterday about the fact that the GOP vote, very animated, and it's very possible that they were a big part of that Georgia surge.
You're right. That's what makes this so concerning. This is something that the American people really have to grasp. Most Americans have not yet voted. What happens in the next few days is going to be critical. But I believe with perfect faith that in the end, if you talk sense to the American people, if they listen, they will understand. May I tell you that Lech Wałęsa, the leader of Polish Solidarity, issued a statement last week essentially saying the idea of Donald Trump as president is appalling. It's scary. It's wrong. And this is something people have to understand. May I tell you that I've talked to people who support Donald Trump who dismiss these kinds of concerns and say, no, we know he just talks. Let me tell you something. When somebody says they're going to come and do something, you better believe them. That's what politics is all about. That's
Well,
what
certainly, by the way, I don't know if I agree with that. I mean, politics is all about a lot of stuff that never happens and promises. But I think in the case of Donald Trump, you've seen him pay off. He paid off with the Supreme Court justices, with a Muslim ban.
I agree.
He comes in really heavy. Here is from mountain bike fan, darn John Kelly waiting until now to put this out there. I think Kelly did it to clear his conscience. But if Trump wins because Kelly waited until now, that wasn't right of Kelly to wait.
Kelly didn't wait. Kelly made a statement several months ago, and it was very clear. And I talked about it on this program as well as on my podcast. And John Kelly clearly has made his statement. But why is he doing it now? There is a fear abroad in the land. There is a concern that people may not remember because our memories are relatively short. I think that what John Kelly is saying, what General Milley is saying, what Mike Pence is saying, what Mark Esper is saying, what the others who work with Donald Trump every day. Do you remember The Apprentice, the whole idea of firing someone? Let me tell you, Mark, before you hire somebody, you check their references. You and I have been through this over many times. You're always checking. The references, the people who Donald Trump said were closest to him are now opposing him. They are against him. And the people who are supporting him now are excusing these absolutely outrageous comments.
I do think that what John is saying is so true. I find most effective the spots, 30-second spots, whatever they might be, however they list these spots in the virality of YouTube or whatever, from the Espers, the Boltons of the world, those who I don't necessarily associate with some sort of righteous causes. They were within the Trump White House. They saw him operate, and you cannot find any one of them that will say anything that's positive about this guy, but it goes beyond that. It wasn't like some sort of just political spat within the Oval, right, John? They felt as though this guy is utterly incompetent and dangerous to national security, in the thrall of leaders like Putin and despots worldwide wanting to be one himself. These are his people saying that.
That's right. And you're going to play, I think you said Albert had it, the discussion between Liz Cheney and Kamala Harris. Look, Liz Cheney is a conservative Republican. She disagrees with Kamala Harris on virtually every major issue, but she puts her country first. And that, to me, is the key. We need to have people like Liz Cheney, like Dick Cheney, with whom we also had massive disagreements. They are doing. By the way, do you know that Dick Cheney?
We do not need Dick Cheney, and I'm going to draw the line there.
Hold on, no.
I would S-can Dick Cheney. He's a
okay,
despicable, grotesque historical figure.
Dick Cheney was chief of staff to Gerald Ford. I don't know if you know that. And he understands the role of a chief of staff. Part of his reaction has to do with General Kelly's remarks. And when you have former chiefs of staff who speak out on this question, I don't disregard anything, because this is a mortal danger to America.
Sure, I get it. The fact that Dick Cheney is right about Trump being a danger doesn't wash his record of
nobody's talking about his record.
War crimes that he was part of. We're
not talking about Dick Cheney's record. We're talking about the fact that Donald Trump, if he's president of the United States, as Kamala Harris said today, all the bars on his conduct will be off. There won't be any limit to him.
Completely agree. Roll the tape that Brother Rothmann wants, which is this is very important. What John Rothmann is saying is one plank of what they're trying to lay down, which is look at all the GOP, as John has just said, to disagree maybe on policy, but agree that there's an overwhelming need for a Harris vote in this case. So that's what they're out with. They're out with GOP for Kamala Harris, in effect. And this is Kamala Harris with Liz Cheney. Go ahead. We'll watch a little bit of it.
If you tell us, but you start, you've actually marshaled unprecedented support from Republicans in this election. Why do you think that is?
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you for being here and for your work, and the Congresswoman. Thank you. I have said before, and it must be repeated each time, there are moments in the history of our country which challenge us, each of us, to really decide, do we stand for those things that we talk about, including a particular country over party. And you have been extraordinarily courageous in the way that you have done that. And I thank you for that.
With its 120.
May I point out
okay.
to you, Mark, that there are over 200 Republicans running for political office who still say that they accept the fact that Donald Trump really won the election of 2020.
Yeah,
Anyone who says that ought to be defeated for election.
Completely agree. Continue, please, Albert.
Sorry.
So, I have in my career now, whether it was as the elected district attorney, elected attorney general, and then elected United States senator, and of course now vice president, I've counted that I have taken the oath of office 6 times. And for the elected leaders here, we know it is an oath that one must take sincerely and unequivocally, which is an oath, among other things, to support and defend the Constitution of the United States, and to understand what those principles represent and what they require of the individual who holds the office in the public trust. And let's not undervalue that point as well. It is not about the individual. It is not about what is in their personal interest. It is about what is for and in the spirit of the public good. And this is a moment in this election that presents a real contrast among how I, as one of the 2 nominees, and my opponent, the former president, think of that duty. And it is a duty, by the way. There are certain things in our lives that we have the choice if we feel like it. And then there are certain things that are just fundamentally a duty, like to raise our children, things of that nature. It is a duty to take seriously that oath and do it for the sake of the public good and in the public trust. And I think that this moment, with the choice that the American people have in this election in 2 weeks and 1 day, this election is presenting, for the first time probably in certainly recent history, a very clear choice and difference between the 2 nominees.
I would have started with that. She finished with that. Okay, the point I'll swing around to is that's why Obama is a better surrogate, John. You can say people don't vote for surrogates, but he makes a much more emphatic case than does Kamala Harris. I found her, of course, the substance of what she's saying is absolutely true, but I just feel as though, in this urgent time, and again, a lot of this depends on the forum, too. It's a quieter forum, so she's not, she can't speak with the passion, for example, or just even the volume that Obama did. But I just feel, boy, Barack Obama is just way ahead of her in terms of his magic.
Clinton. Bill Clinton is saying the same thing. We have former presidents. Let me point out to you, there is not a former president or former Republican vice president who is voting for Donald Trump. And that, to me, George W. Bush, with all due respect, hasn't said what he's going to do. He said he's staying out of it. But we understand very clearly what's at stake here. And I want to thank you, Mark, because I think what we are doing now in bringing this to light is so important for people to understand. And I really respectfully tell you, I always try to be objective. I'm no longer trying to be objective in this campaign. Donald Trump's presidency would be too dangerous. And I'll tell you what really worries me is if he wins, the kinds of discussions you and I are going to have, I believe, will be even more fearful. So we're doing everything we can in every forum, in every speech I give, in every podcast I deliver, in every public appearance I make, and I'm making quite a few in the next week, to make this point. And we just have to see how it plays.
John, it is great to visit with you always. We'll look forward to next Wednesday and appreciate your perspectives.
Thank you, Mark, and thank you for doing this, and thank you for allowing us, me, to express my views as strongly as I am.
Well, thank you for thanking me, if I can say. John Rothmann is the host of Around the Political World with John Rothmann. Find his podcast and find John across the Twitterverse, across the universe, across the webverse, and across the podcast verse.
And on the Mark Thompson Show.
And here on Wednesdays. It'll always happen. Thank you, John. John Rothmann, everybody. Hi, it's Mark, and I thought that was great. Hit the notification bell, you'll know whenever there's a new video being dropped, and please subscribe to our channel to help us save the universe.